Thank you very much for those who joined. I'm sure a few more will come in as we go. Today is the OSS Data Science and AI section meetup, a panel discussion, and we're going to be talking about a issue that I think we will all come across in our careers as practitioners, researchers, academics, and that is the intersection between algorithmic development in AI and what it means for intellectual property. This has changed a lot over the years, but we're very fortunate today to be joined by some experts who can help explain their views, their experiences. So I'll just go around the room. We have Professor David Barber, who's the director of the UCL Centre for Artificial Intelligence and director of the UKRI Centre for Doctoral Training in Foundational AI, focusing a lot of the work on basic systems in AI. We have Professor Noam Shemtov, who's a professor of intellectual property and technology law at Queen Mary's University London, as well as deputy head of the CCLS. We have Dr. Martin Goodson, who's the CEO and chief scientist of Evolution AI, chairing the RSS Data Science and AI section, as well as hosting the infamous Machine Learning London meetups. If you don't go to those, I would highly recommend. There's some fantastic talks. And Janet Bastiman, who's a chief scientist at Napier AI. So we've got the practitioner, we have research and academic, as well as the legal insight. And today we're going to answer a few questions, or we're going to try and answer a few questions. I'm not sure we get through all of them, but we want to understand what the value is in IP and AI. Should we be patenting algorithms? Should algorithms be protected by trade secrets or other mechanisms? What role does that patent system play in encouraging the development and use of AI? A key one that kind of we see a lot is how should you be compensated either as a researcher or an industry for the development of an innovative solution? What's the best way of protecting that? And then really what's happened so far in the legal system, what's likely to change? Because we're seeing a lot of change here in the UK and abroad. So I'd like to really kick this off by doing a little bit of a kind of a round robin, if that's okay, going through each of the groups that we have here today to hear their views on the subjects that we've just discussed, as well as understanding what they think should change, any questions that they have. So I'd like to start, if that's okay, with Martin, just to give us kind of 5 minutes on his experience in negotiating IP from his perspective, both as someone who is very active in the data science community, as well as someone who runs a business themselves.
Thanks a lot, Will. Hi, everyone. I'm Martin Goodson. So I'm the CEO of an AI startup called Evolution AI. And I guess you could say I'm at the coalface of intellectual property. Every day, our team are developing algorithms, writing code, and we're trying to turn it into products that can be sold. So I should say I'm not an expert in IP at all. I'm really interested to be here and learn about best practice from some of the experts in the panel. But maybe I have some a viewpoint of someone who has to actually use IP and generate value in terms of cash using IP. So as a bit of background, our firm, Evolution AI, is very R&D intensive. So our product is for extracting data from financial documents using computer vision and natural language processing. So we need to do a lot of algorithm development, and we spend a lot of time on things like neural network design. So I do need to care about protecting IP, just as a simple matter of business reality. So we normally do that using trade secrets and confidentiality agreements. So our product is server-based, it's a SaaS product. So if we did patent something and someone copied us, how would we even know? It's not like a hardware device where it's maybe a bit more obvious if a patent has been infringed. But another reason I need to care about this is because sometimes I have investors breathing down my neck saying, you need to patent things, you stupid idiot. But whenever I've spoken to lawyers about this, they never give me a straight answer about whether you actually can patent an algorithm. And anyway, why would I want to write a patent and tell all of my competitors in great detail the inner workings of our machine learning models? So there's that. I also need to care about IP issues when it comes to applying for government funding. So the government funding bodies, well, this is what people say, that government funding bodies like to see startups collaborating with universities. So you kind of need to include a university in a proposal if you want to get funding. So we've done this before, and for one project, we won funding of around £1 million for an AI research project. So unfortunately, our original university partner pulled out of the project, so we needed to find a new one. So we set about trying to find a new university partner to work with us. So we brought around £1 million in funding. We had the original research idea, we had the research plan, and we had the scientific leader of the project, who was me. However, most of the universities we spoke to wanted to own all of the intellectual property resulting from the project. The idea would be that we would need to license it from the university in order to use it after the project was completed. I thought that this was completely mad, and we got to the point where we were in danger of losing our funding because we just couldn't find a university who was willing to work with us without owning all of the IP. And, our investors also said, if you do this, you're mad. You just can't sign a deal like this. You can't sign a contract like this. But eventually we found a sane university, the University of Southampton, who were very pragmatic, and they took a completely different approach, and we had a really successful project with them. So we had a good success in the end, but it was quite stressful. So we have this situation where we're kind of forced to work with universities because the government wants us to. The universities seem to have this default position, which is that in any industry collaboration, the university are coming up with all the ideas and the IP, and these kind of brain-dead industry researchers will not be creating anything. We don't really agree with that. We can't really agree to signing away all of our IP. It would be commercial suicide. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation. I don't really know what the answer is, but maybe that's a point for discussion. Anyway, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more from the rest of the panel and also the audience about these issues.
Brilliant. Thanks, Martin. I think the two really salient points I've got from that is how do I protect what has already been developed and find out if it's been breached? So is trade secrets enough for a commercial organization? And then how can collaboration be fair? Which I think are two really, really important points. I'd like to hand over to Janet now to just give another kind of perspective from an industry, which I think is slightly different, but hopefully will provide more questions for us to address.
Thank you. I'm in a similar position to Martin. I work in industry. I'm chief data scientist and have been at several different companies. And from my point of view, I've been trying to find that balancing line between keeping secrets, but also showcasing the company as a leader in both research and also intellectual property knowledge. And I found you can be successful doing both things, and I'll touch on some of the points Martin made in a minute, but it's really down to the company and how the company wants to view things, because you can very successfully build a business and be hugely successful just with keeping your IP secret. And exactly as Martin said, some of the things we're doing, it's very difficult to know if someone's infringed it. There's also so much that's already out there that's freely available. I mean, the wondrous thing about data science and AI is there's so much that you can build on. So at what point are you taking something that's in the public domain and how much have you changed it in order for it to be actually protectable as a patent or even as an academic paper? However, there is space within this, and most of the companies I've worked for have taken a fairly healthy strategy of looking at the projects we're doing and going, can we have a project with a university that showcases that we're research leading in what we're doing? And it doesn't matter that that's out there and in the public domain, because the value we get from that of saying, our researchers are published academics, we have these partnerships and we have these papers that we're producing is really valuable to us when we go out to investors or to clients. So it's just a question of choosing the right sort of projects and, exactly as Martin alluded to, the right universities. Because if you go into this blindly, you can absolutely end up with a partnership where the university has all of the IP and basically not only publishes things, but anything patentable, they patent, and then you're licensing back from them. And that would be a terrible situation to be in. But there are universities out there, as Martin said, that are a bit more sensible. And at Napier, where I currently work, we have an active partnership with a university where we look at key projects. We work with them on those projects, and we're happy for the outcomes of those projects to be papers and, at conferences and freely available in the industry, because improving anti-money laundering, because I'm in the regulatory technology industry myself, is good for everybody. So it shows that we're helping support the industry, and that's really valuable to us. Similarly, when you look at patents, exactly as Martin said, there's that protected bit, but you are exposing to the world all of your methodology. For some things, that's not viable. There are some things that you just can't patent just because they're too similar to things that are already out there. So you really have got to have done something very different. And then do you want to make that accessible? At a previous company, we took the approach that just going through the process, even if it wasn't ultimately successful, was a valid marketing spend, because patenting comes with quite a cost. But having patent pending while it was going through this multi-year process was a valuable thing for us, even if the outcome wasn't necessarily successful. So that was valid. However, if you've got something that you really do want to protect and it is that different, then it is also a viable strategy, and investors love this because it gives them this patent portfolio, which means when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, you've got potentially almost a bargain trade-off. So if someone accuses you of infringing, then maybe you can trade back. So it's a really difficult scenario, but as Martin said, investors love it. But having that almost spread type of how you deal with your IP, so maybe some things very public that you're happy to share, some things, and the majority of it you keep as your trade secrets and don't go outside of your business, and then look at the patent process separately, can be really, really valuable for most businesses in the UK.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anna. That's a really interesting and again, slightly different. I think the idea that working with sensible universities leads to maybe some universities missing out is quite an interesting idea, that there's a possibility that by going through this strict IP process of owning everything, that students and researchers are not getting exposed to the right problems that they could be exposed to actually kind of accelerate the development and accelerate research.
I think that's right. Yes, absolutely. Because it's, I think the bigger the university, the more likely they are to want more control. But then, of course, you've got the prestige of working with those bigger universities. But at the same point, if they're not getting their hands on that real data, then a lot of the work they're doing becomes theoretical or synthetic, and they're not pushing the boundaries in the way they could be, which is a huge shame.
So I guess we've heard from the grumpy industrial human beings trying to make a quick buck off the hard work of academic researchers, which is of course not what we're trying to say here. But David, it'd be great to hear from your perspective, on the other side of the fence. I know you do a lot of work with commercial organisations, but what are the challenges from your side in getting this balance to work?
Yeah, I mean, I totally, chime with what Martin and Janet have said. I mean, basically, I should also say, I've also co-founded a couple of AI companies as well. So I'm not just coming from the academic perspective, but I mean, I'm coming from, my comments are really as an individual academic, and I also, I'm not sure if suffer is quite the right phrase, but I've also struggled with some of the university viewpoints on things like intellectual property as well, both as an individual academic and also as a startup founder. I should say, I mean, there is some good news, at least from my perspective. I mean, I think when I started our first company, 7 odd years ago, it was really difficult to negotiate with the university what IP meant in the AI space. It was actually really, or at least at UCL, it was, they were very kind, but I think their background was much more intangible things, chemical processes or stuff that they felt, more comfortable understanding. And I think the whole idea of AI and algorithms, it was a bit of a, just a sort of a terra incognita for them. And I think we really struggled to even get them to understand, what was going on. In some senses, my experience is that IP or patenting stuff can be useful. I have seen a couple of cases in AI, even at UCL, where that's been there was a key technology that people came up with, which actually was really quite clearly identifiably different and useful. But I think actually in most of the situations I've seen, it's not really that easy to think of that thing as a patentable unit. It's really the marriage of the AI, the algorithm, and the business opportunity and the integration of that idea into the software frameworks and development. So 95% of the work is actually in the software engineering, or just getting this idea, this AI thing, but actually finding the right business opportunity and then implementing it into a system which is actually valuable for your customer down the line. So I think one needs to move a little bit away from, I think, a lot of the sort of the acquisition style, AI startups. And if you think about the more product focused AI startups, it's a hard slog, right? You've got to make this thing, which is actually, and the value in it is really much more in the business proposition rather than the idea, the AI algorithm itself. In my experience, although that's not not always the case. So I think then the idea that you patent this is complicated, or the intellectual property around it is complicated. But I think one thing that I found, that investors are very keen on seeing is that they want clarity. It's not so much that this thing is, again, in my experience, that this thing is necessarily patented, but what they don't want, when you come to, you get bored or acquired by somebody, the last thing the lawyers want to see is a kind of a question mark on who owns this thing, right? They don't want the university to come running, down the line, say, well, hang on a sec, actually, our resources were used to develop this whole thing, and that's like a big thing which is dangling there. And actually the intellectual property is more to just shut down any difficulties from the outset which could arise from the lack of clarity about actually ownership when it comes to M&A down the line. So that's definitely an experience I've had. I should say that I think universities like UCL, maybe I don't necessarily want to say two bad things, but I think there's a kind of, they are going through a change. I think there is a maybe a kind of a learning phase that they also need to go through to understand the new landscape. And a lot of the lawyers which are currently there actually don't have that background. A lot of these people who are doing these negotiations are quite senior folks who perhaps have not had the the benefit yet of understanding or quite how things are catching up in or developing in a very fast-paced moving world. I mean, it's very complicated to, even for ourselves, really quite understand what's going on. But I should say one thing which I think is very difficult, and I continually struggle with this as an academic, is that we're talking now about things like universities negotiating with companies, and whether or not that's for the situations like Martin's talking about, or it can actually be well, the problem is that the viewpoint of this, the framework is, university negotiates with company, right, and they come to some arrangement about intellectual property or whatever it is, right? But actually, this is a kind of, in my view, a kind of a false way of thinking about the whole thing. The reality is that the academics and the individual researchers at the university are the ones that will carry out the work. So you can make an agreement between the university and some company, but that is it's meaningless unless the individual researcher at the university is incentivized to do that work. And unfortunately, this is a viewpoint that I've never yet really encountered anybody at universities who fully gets this, right? So you end up then coming to some high level agreement and then say, okay, let's hire a postdoc or a researcher for £35,000 a year who wants to work on this project, and then nobody wants to apply, right? This is well, what the heck? I can get £350,000 a year just by going to the tech giant. I'm not even finished my PhD yet. So like there's an absolute huge gap in understanding about how to motivate individual researchers in this space, particularly on the academic side. So So the good news, though, is there are amazing opportunities to do that, and I think UCL is actually relatively, despite some of the difficulties we had historically, I think they're quite progressive in this viewpoint. They take a view, I think, that they should do whatever they can to motivate individuals to actually make startup companies, whether they're students or staff, and they take a relatively small equity stake in those companies. So between 5 to 10%, depending on the level of investment and legal sort of help that they might give them. And I think that's actually quite appreciated, by people. I think they then see the university as a kind of a very a willing partner, and somebody that really we sort of go forth with our goodwill and try to make it happen, rather than some universities which actually take a significantly larger fraction of equity. And I think that's a kind of a bit of a people are not particularly happy about that generally, neither the academics nor the investors. So I think those are interesting things to consider. So maybe I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thanks, David. I think it is, when you put it so starkly as that, the motivation to do work and the individuals that want to do it, it's so critical to all of this. If there's a continual, there's a lack of motivation because this project that someone's come up with from a Innovate UK grant that's been chucked down towards them, and they don't get anything back from it. There is a perverse incentive structure at the moment, and I think I guess I've sometimes gone into those sorts of conversations with the assumption that a paper is all that someone wants at the end of it. They want to get papers published and that's it. But I think in AI, the other side of the fence in terms of the tech giants is so drastically competitive that's just not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I heard, it was maybe it's a while ago now, but I think universities, again, I think there's a lot of naivety, both from the university negotiation position, but sometimes maybe less so recently, but from the company's position. But I have heard companies say, well, this is great for you, David. You can get access to all this data. So okay, thank you very much. But well, so what? Like people are really struggling with financially, and they're wondering. We all already have huge leakage out of the universities. People are either working part-time in the tech giants, or they're just leaving full stop. And people need to get real about this. Universities need to wake up to incentivizing their people properly, and currently they operate largely at the legal and the negotiation stage as if these are two corporates, right? Corporation A, university, negotiate corporation B, and as if we can do deals, we shake hands, and actually the reality is it's a disaster when it comes to the implementation side, because the motivation is simply not there.
And so throughout, kind of a theme we're hearing, I think, is about individuals and the efforts of individuals, and how IP and AI doesn't necessarily match those things very well. The person who starts the company, puts in all the work, gets all the funding, develops it all, and then is expected to lose everything. The partnership, which relies heavily on joint publication and reveals secrets, also doesn't seem fair. The individual researcher being pulled across to work on something and not being paid the value of their work is also, it all comes down to sort of fairness and what is going to be fair now and in the future. So I don't know, we've covered a lot of topics, but it'd be great to hear from a legal perspective, both in terms of what's happening now in terms of individuals creating AI. And I know there's also kind of a topic we haven't touched yet, which I think probably is one of the end, more about what AI does and how that influences copyright and IP, because there are two sides to this. There's the people who build the AI, and then there's what the AI does. So yeah, it'd be great to hear your perspective on this as well.
Thank you, Will. And I think, I'm not sure where to start. I had a plan, and then we had those fantastic viewpoints for three different people. And I think that, I'll start, as far as I can remember, some of the points that were raised here, by perhaps try and refute some myths. So speaking about lawyers, my experience that also M&A lawyers are not necessarily the biggest experts in IP when it comes. There are certain formulas according to which they work. So, for example, I think it was Janet, but Martin as well, who mentioned that universities, for example, are interested in keeping the IP, right? And then you have to come to them and ask for permission. Now, this is not something that is novel or unique to the AI angle. So, for example, if you are a commercial, let's say that you approach a software house, right? Two commercial entities, and you wish, and you sign a software development contract. So you pay the money. Would you expect to own the IP in the resulting software? Forget it. In most cases, they won't give you the IP because the IP that they generate for you when you pay the money is used as a building block or parts of it afterwards for various products. If they give you the IP, that means that their hands are tied. So the question is, what do they give you? And the fact that they keep, as far as the label is concerned, they keep the IP is not necessarily attractive to you, but you have to dig deeper and see what is it that you can get. So for example, if you do not intend to commercialize the IP in terms of licensing to other parties, but what you wish to do is to use it without any limitations, what you would be looking for is a perpetual, possibly non-exclusive license. Now, if you get that as part of the deal, then you have, and it's a properly done license, then you should, in principle, have a peace of mind. Nobody's going to be knocking at your door. You don't have to go and negotiate with the university in relation to, further users or commercializations that you may be interested in. If you do intend, however, to license it to other parties, this is where you can get into trouble, and then you can get a license, but it is limited geographically. So my point here is that if you don't get the IP, you have to think about your business model and see what is it that you can get in terms of a license, and maybe it is enough, or sometimes more than enough, for what you actually need. Now, how can you? So I'll actually start. I'll jump straight to patents because I'm not sure that we will have all the time to touch on copyright. Maybe towards the end. So when I think about AI and patents, there are two distinct scenarios that one may have in mind. One is AI as a tool in invention-making processes, and the other is AI as a protectable subject matter. And I think that the conversation up until now focused on the latter, right? So how do I protect my AI? But another question is indeed the AI that you guys produce or participate in making, it may be used in various contexts in invention-making processes as a tool. Now, what does that mean for the people that, for example, license from you this AI? And as far as the patent scene is concerned, we've seen a lot of action, so to speak, in the last few years. And there was, let's call it by its name, call it a test case. There was this application that was filed all over the world, known as the Davos application, that was filed by an American inventor that claimed that, leave the subject matter of application itself, that he is the applicant, but he is not the inventor. The inventor is the AI that he developed, which he named Davos. And they filed in the States and in Australia and in Germany, in the UK, and in a variety of other jurisdictions. Now, I was lucky enough to an extent. 4 months before the application was made, this test case was actually filed, I wrote a study for the European Patent Office on AI and inventorship. And I predicted, kind of guesstimated, that if an application, one more thing, when you apply for a patent anywhere in the world, you need to designate the inventor. You need to name her or him. It's compulsory. Now, what this guy did is actually named Davos, and he explained, right, why. And what I estimated or guesstimated was that, and I looked at 8 key jurisdictions, which are major in terms of patent filing, that it would fail in each and every one of them. And I did that by actually examining patent law and patent jurisprudence in each of those jurisdictions. So the usual suspects in Europe and Korea and Japan and China. And it's one of those rare occasions where, at least in my area, you actually prove right as an academic. And indeed, this test case was filed in the States, in Germany, at the EPO, European Patent Office, in the UK, and also in Australia. And it is indeed, it was not successful in the sense that in each and every one of those jurisdictions, the holding was clear. You have to have a human agent designated as an inventor on a patent application. If you designate an AI, it would fail. The application would, and that has to do with the makeup of a patent law, whether it's right or wrong. This is the statutory language of patent laws around the world and jurisprudence that developed there. Another thing that I did in my study, so rather than just looking at could you do that, is should you be able to do that? And this is where I actually looked at public policy, and this is still up in the air. And at least my view is that, at least for the time being in the foreseeable future, there is no reason to revise our patent law, because on the present rules of inventorship and the patent law, you can always identify a human agent as an inventor, no matter how crucial the AI contribution to the invention-making process is. And therefore, you are not left with inventor-less inventions. So you can always get your protection there. Something which is a little bit more practical is part of our patent, and I'm sure everyone here knows that part of our patent examination is to look at whether the thing is inventive or not. That is it obvious? And traditionally, we benchmark an invention against a person skilled in this specific art. And we ask, is it obvious to the person who is skilled in the art in question, right? It can be a biochemistry or particular type, for example. But how do we actually do this benchmarking where the real leap in the invention-making process can be attributed to an AI? Something which can be completely non-obvious to a brilliant researcher becomes, or could become, rather straightforward to someone who is using AI. So what is the person skilled in the art? Who is the person skilled in the art? And there are practical solutions to those problems. I published a paper a few months ago on this point, and the idea is that indeed we take the person, is this notional person skilled in the art is rather a team of researchers, and it becomes evident in a lot of sectors now, this team of researchers has to include an AI, right? An AI, someone with AI expertise of the type which is relevant to that particular invention. Now, leaving that aside, I'll try to zoom in on, I think, what the main question or issues that were raised by the three presenters before me is: can you protect your AI? And starting indeed with patent law. Now, so when it comes to protectability of AI itself, the concept of technical effect. So this is a legal term, technical effect, at least in Europe, that is all the countries which are part of the European Patent Office, is key. There has to be a technical effect. Now, I think at least a few of the speakers before me asked or focused on the question of whether what you have done or developed is sufficiently different from that has gone before. The fact that, let's say that it is sufficiently different, it's brilliant, it's not enough, because it may very well be that this which is very, very different from what has gone, this which has gone before, is not considered to be technical. Now, to you guys who are scientists, that may sound very weird. How it cannot be technical? It relates to AI. Well, you'll have to take my word on it. It does, and it does so in most cases. The majority of computer-implemented inventions fail exactly for that reason. It's considered there are very clear, well, I don't know if clear, strict rules on what is and what is not technical. So now, if you look at artificial intelligence and machine learning, now there are, from what I understand, they're based on computational models and algorithms for classifications, clustering, and so on. Now, it's important to understand that these computational models and algorithms as such or per se are considered to be of an abstract mathematical nature, and as such are not patentable. It doesn't matter how brilliant they are and how different they are from this which has gone before. They're not. Now, if you actually look, and by the way, when we talk about IP, we talk about it as though it's one rule for all. There are sometimes very important jurisdictional differences out there. And for example, in the States, it may come as a surprise or not as a surprise, the system is somewhat more generous to patenting of, and I refer to AI as a subset of computer implemented inventions, this larger family of innovation. Now, if you look, for example, at the EPO guidelines, right? EPO, sorry, that's the European Patent Office, they give various examples. So, for example, they tell you, if you take something, one of the examples that they give is artificial intelligence and machine learning in neural networks in heart monitoring apparatuses for the purposes of identifying irregular heartbeats. This is an example that there is a clear technical contribution here. So the classification of those digital images, videos, audios, or speech signals, all of those, right, are maybe considered, and further technical applications and classifications of algorithms, all of those may be considered technical in a legal sense and therefore be subject to a successful patent application. Now contrast this with classifying abstract data records, or even, and this is something that was in a previous case, they call telecommunication network data records, right? Without any indication of the technical use that is being made of the resulting classification. This is not, or actually has been held in the past, not to have a per se technical purpose, even if this classification algorithm may be considered, and you can establish it, to have a valuable mathematical properties such as robustness. That is not enough. So you came up with something, it's robust, it's different from this that has gone before, very different. That doesn't mean you get a patent.
So I think it's a good point maybe to open up a little bit to the rest of the panel, because I think you've just raised some really interesting points, because it makes me think, well, if I have a very specific problem, which involves, as you said, very specific odd data or apparatus that is used in a technical environment, and I still don't necessarily think I understand what technical means here, I could just jumble a jumble along of basic kind of ensemble methods, say, hey, I'm doing a good job, and patent it. Or I could come up with something really novel algorithmically, but it being a very generic approach, and that is not patentable. Is that basically where we're getting to?
In a very broad sense, but yes. So as a general, you need to have a technical application that you identify clearly. And yes, the EPO likes to see, first of all, also as weird as it may sound to you, the closest it is to hardware, proper hardware, the more likely it is that you will be able to establish a technical effect or technical character that would enable you, give you better chances. Look, the vast majority of those applications fail, not because they are not different from this which has gone before necessarily. Right? So I think that the key is essentially that where, for example, if you take classification methods, you need to show that they serve a technical purpose, right? So, and when that is the case, the steps of, for example, generating the training set and training the classifiers under such circumstances may also contribute to the technical character of the invention and be part of a patentable invention. Again, the EPO guidelines give some useful examples in that sense, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. You need to understand a little bit more about the concepts in order to be able to apply those examples to a variety of circumstances.
So when a university is looking for ownership of IP, or I'm a bit unclear then, again, Martin, maybe you can come in on this, is what would somebody own? What would be the IP that would be owned here then?
Well, we never got that far. We never got that far. I think the universities just had a general sense that, the lawyers just had a general sense that there was going to be this thing called IP that comes out of the other end. But nobody really had any discussions or concrete ideas about what that would look like. I mean, we didn't get down to, we weren't talking in detail. We weren't talking about patents or anything else. It was just, we are going to own the IP and you're going to need to license it from us. Yeah, I don't know the answer to your question.
I think maybe from the successful example I've had, I could maybe come in on that. So the agreement that we had with the university was exactly as Noam said, a perpetual royalty-free license to use the IP that was produced, which was great. That was also, obviously, we agreed a project up front that while we could make use of, it wasn't a core secret to what we were doing, and we actually wanted to expose. There were also clauses in the agreement that said if what came out of the research was patentable, who would be named on that patent, and the fact that as a company, we had first refusal to go through the patent process and the associated costs. But if we chose not to, then we gave the university permission to then pursue that themselves. And just to pick up on something else Noam said about the technicality, when we did the patent at a previous company, that was exactly our experience. We had this whole suite of what we felt were really impressive algorithmic processes that we were really quite excited about. And when we actually came to do the application, none of that was mentioned, and that was all kept hidden. It was just like almost a sentence, but the actual detail of how we'd done all this clever mathematics wasn't there. But what we were looking at was the way in which we took different media types, processed them and merged them together, applied some AI, and then how we spread that out and used that for business impact. And it was a really bizarre thing to go through, because we'd gone through lots of internal discussion about exposing this and was the right thing to do to patent or to publish a paper. And we decided on the patent route just because the investors at the time, just as Martin said, were really, really keen on it. And just having that, that application in process not only boosted investment interest, but also boosted sales, because it was a big thing for us as a small company. But it was a very strange experience, and having that, obviously individuals, so me and my team were the named inventors, but part of that process was immediately signing that over to ownership of the company we worked for. So there's no personal gain out of that invention. And I believe that that's the same situation in universities as well as in industry. So you're not getting that personal reward for coming up with something that's truly inventive.
So we really haven't solved David's problem of how do we motivate individuals to do innovative things that are going to solve commercial problems. That's
well, it's yeah. I mean, in my experience, you can at universities, academics and students who come up with companies, they do own equity in these things, and there are ways to motivate people. So maybe it's not quite that bad. I think universities are maybe changing a little bit, but I think they're becoming more realistic in what universities are actually for. They are not necessarily for themselves, right? I mean, they are for the public good, primarily. And I think how they function as a vehicle to take ideas that ultimately largely the public have paid for and help commercialize them. I think they're becoming more realistic about how to actually achieve that. And I think also there are good things to see, down the line. I think that the way the government is funding research is also becoming more focused on, of course, there's long-term research, but they're also interested in seeing how we commercialize things or the impact of our research, and if that has a commercial outcome, that's also, we get a big pat on the back from the government for doing that. So I think, things are changing, but I think, just harking back to what I said before, I think, people do need to take very seriously the issue of motivation from every side. Whenever you're negotiating with the university, whether or not you're a a company or you're a university administrator and you're negotiating with a company, you need to fully consider the motivation for the people who are actually going to be working on this. And if it's not there, you've got very little. You have basically a dead horse on your hands, and I've seen that so many times. It's very frustrating, and I'm hoping that things are changing for the better, and I think they are. I mean, the good thing about the UK is that historically we've been very strong and continue to be very strong on core AI, algorithmic creation of new algorithms. And I think we've also been quite agile in how to commercialize them, and I think we've got a great track record. I think investors see the UK as a fantastic place to do AI innovation, to make investments, and I think we need more of this. It's and I think universities are also, they are trying to support it as well, but there is some maturation required. But the good news is I think that has begun. I think people are becoming much more aware of the challenges that are there. But these are big beasts. They take time to move. They don't change their sort of environments at the university overnight. It takes a long time for the attitudes to change. Heads needs to be knocked together to make these things happen. But the incentives from the government are starting to, I think, push people in that direction. And I think the realities of the universities now have woken up to say, well, gosh, didn't realize that so much money is actually being created and valued by our AI startups. It's great stuff. How can we make more of that happen? And I personally think that the patenting is not necessarily the most important thing. It's actually it's not always a red herring. There are certainly genuine situations where it's important and useful, but often it's not that important. First mover advantage, making sure that when it comes to M&As, that investors are happy with understanding as the contributions of various actors in the creation of these technologies. But beyond that, it's really just use these technologies and in a business, in a meaningful way in a business, and and get value from it there. And the idea that universities are sweating over patenting this and that, I think is a little bit too old-fashioned by and large.
Amazing. Yeah. So it sounds like what we're saying, and I think we should open it up to the rest of the audience as well for any questions. So if people would like to raise a hand to ask any, but to kind of synthesize the discussion so far, it seems that we have several people we need to keep happy. We have investors, we have university lawyers, we have researchers, and we have industry specialists building companies. And there doesn't seem to be a very good way of making all these people happy. But ultimately, protection at the moment seems to be the best way of doing it is through trade secrets and patentability, if possible, but that's unlikely. And motivation needs to come through equity. And those two things seem quite different to, I think, how most people are talking about this. And to your point about what it actually means to patent something, I mean, I personally would have had absolutely no idea what to think about that. I would have thought that the clever maths would get you somewhere. And so I think it's really, really interesting to hear that it's just not the case at all. So if I missed anything from anyone's point, and would anyone from the audience like to kind of speak up? Please raise a hand if you would, if you have questions. Otherwise, we'll keep discussing.
Maybe while we're waiting for the audience, well, I just a very minor point, which is we've spoken a lot about motivation, but it was interesting to hear about Janet's experience of patenting and being named as the inventor, but then immediately signing over all of the IP over to the company that you work for. Do we think that's a problem? I mean, people get paid a salary, right? I mean, researchers are do they need another incentive beyond their compensation for their job? I mean, that's their job, isn't it? To create, if a marketing, it's not only AI researchers that create IP. I mean, marketing teams write stuff, text, marketing copy. That's subject to copyright. That's IP as well. We don't expect the marketing team to get, I want to get 5% of all future earnings because I've created this fantastic piece of content. Why should there be this additional thing?
I actually have, I think, two points to make in that context. First, and it's a rarity, but it's good to know. You know, should you come across a situation like this, UK patent law, and by the way, it's not only wherever you look at, whether it's Germany, France, they have the same thing. Employee inventors are entitled to additional compensation on top of their salary, irrespective of what they signed off, on the rare occasions where they can actually show that the invention that was protected by the patent is of outstanding benefit to the employer. So they did over and above what a researcher working in their position, they produced over and above. I mean, it's not a low threshold to establish, but you know, it's there. But another thing is, I actually, so I work with the industry. I'm also a commercial a lawyer in my training. But both my experience, which are lesser than yours for sure, and some actually academic research that I've looked at from the management side, so not IP at all, shows that being designated as an inventor has a reputational, a reward element. Which we cannot I think dismiss easily. So if you are the inventor or one of two or three inventors on a patent application, which you know gained some kudos out there because of what it is about, that also it kind of embodies in itself some kind of an indirect pecuniary reward, because if you are there, that means that in terms of reputation, your reputation is enhanced, and that can affect some potential, possibly employment opportunities or possibilities. So, and again, I'm not the management theory guy, but the people have looked at not in an AI context, beyond that, and apparently there is something there. So I wonder, what do you think about that?
No, just on the first point, you mentioned this idea that if your invention is giving outstanding value to your employer. I think it's true. You probably know this, but I think it's true that Kary Mullis, who invented PCR, polymerase chain reaction, he only received a bonus of about $10,000, I think, for PCR. So he won a Nobel Prize for that invention.
Yeah,
the bar must be quite high for this.
It is. First of all, it's the US, and secondly, I think also the case law has improved. So in the past, if you would, for example, work for a company like IBM, let's say that something like IBM, let's say that your invention is fantastic and generated 0.5 of IBM turnover. Now, it's an enormous amount if you think about it, but it's not outstanding, or it was not considered outstanding in relation to IBM, because you look at the overall IBM turnover. So it used to be looked at very crude, in very crude terms in the past, in that way. Today, the formula is a bit more sophisticated. But as I said, this is in the small minority of cases, but it's there, and it may be useful to bear it in mind. But I think the point is indeed the idea that there is a reputational reward here. I wonder, from your experience, how far do you think that goes to the people that work for you actually, and they are designated as inventors? Do they take pride in that fact, over and above what they get in terms of the salaries?
Yeah, I think in my example, yes, we did, even though it was just a process at that point. It was just quite exciting for the team. In some respects, more exciting than academic papers, because it was different and it was new, and it's a whole new section on LinkedIn to fill in. So they had something that maybe their peers didn't. So that in itself was quite nice. And sort of a little bit later on, when some of the team moved on, it was something interesting to talk about beyond what they were doing, because it was out there and in the public domain. They could talk about that whole process in a different way. So I agree with the reputational aspect. I think that does carry value. And if you're in a company that doesn't have like a paper publishing strategy, I think it's a way of incentivizing academically minded people to give them a different outlet. So I think it's definitely valuable in that sense.
maybe a kind of question that we've skirted around. What do people think? Do we think the current system is fair for researchers and others in AI? Do we think what we've talked about the reality, but is it fair?
Fair is a very big thing to define. I think, like everything in business and academia, there's differences, and I think you have to go in it with your eyes open and having done a bit of research. Otherwise, it definitely won't be fair. I mean, exactly as Martin gave earlier with his examples of, what the universities wanted in his partnerships, and even as David gave some other universities, if I've heard people say that they wanted to do their startup and the university was looking at taking 50% of equity just basically to help them set up the business. And if that's your starting point and you don't argue that because maybe it's your first business and you're grateful to have the support, then you're going to lose out. Whereas if you go into it having listened to these sorts of events, maybe spoken to some people that have gone through it, then you'll be a little bit more mindful. Exactly in the same way as if you try to pursue a patent without having anything other than the clever maths, you can spend tens of thousands of pounds on lawyers' fees and get nothing. So I think fairness is quite an abstract concept. So probably no, I think in the scheme of things, but I think that's the way of the world.
Great.
Brilliant. Well, I think going in with your eyes open, understanding that a patent is, it seems from the conversation we've had, one way and not a particularly lucrative way of securing your investment, and that ultimately the collaboration has to be pretty layered, it seemed, if we're going to make this work. It's going to have to be very much upfront, very, very clear as who owns what and what options people have and at what stage of the process. And it isn't actually, there isn't really a simple answer. It isn't just you agree 50-50, it's patentable if applicable. If not, you get the second one and you will have this equity and the option to buy further equity. If it comes, it feels much more complicated. I don't know, David, if you had a kind of thought.
We didn't even touch on this layer. So trade secrecy is how you manage your relationship with your employees. It is there. This is and then and there is a lot of mobility there, right? So they leave, they go to work elsewhere. This is a minefield in its own right.
To your question, well, I mean, I think one other thing, to bear in mind is that, again, this is not always the case, but, it's often the situation that most startups will actually pivot multiple times before they find something which has got, business value, right? So the idea that somehow a priori, you can identify that thing which is somehow the golden nugget, which is going to, make all the money by thinking about getting a bunch of lawyers to sit down and, it's just nonsense, by and large. Not always but nonsense, but by and large, it's just a completely, wrong way of looking at the whole thing. It's a long process. It's hard work. There's a lot of conversations, and at the end of that, you hopefully find some marriage, as I was saying before, of the the AI nugget with the business opportunity, and then you're good to go. And then, but the idea that that's all doable by just sitting around with a bunch of lawyers and academics from the start with devoid of any business realities is a bit silly, I think.
Really great. I think we've raced through an hour of discussion. I feel like we could probably sit and talk for quite a bit longer on lots of these topics, but we should stop and respect everybody's time. So thank you everybody for joining today, and thank you very much our panel members for having such a nuanced and complicated relationship with our IP and AI. It was never going to be a simple answer, and I don't think we've got very much further than the start, but hopefully this will give you some of the tools that's needed to understand what's going on and where you could go wrong. So thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you come to the next event that we put on.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all.